49% of the market for the South District for missing middle housing was people already living here in Iowa City. So that's really important to note that it isn't an influx of 100% of people coming from out of town to Iowa City for this missing middle approach. They said that just a little under half of buyers already live here. And they broke it down like this, but they looked at about 1,000 units over the first 5 years for the whole South District. And they didn't say that had to be built. They're saying they could see that demand being needed. And that about 200 of those would be, like a fourth of those would be missing middle housing. And that sort of bears out with the zoning map that you're going to see in a little bit. I just want to touch on it here. We've taken that and interpreted it somewhat that our approach is single-family houses will still be a bigger mix of the total. They're probably 3/4, 60%, 60 to 70% of the total mix of what can happen here. And about 20 to 25%, something like that, is what we call the missing middle, the duplexes through the fourplexes and eightplexes. And you can see the information on the market capture there. They're thinking that rental would be up to 20 and for sale would be 15 per year of the whole market in South District of Iowa City's market capture or market. 20% of it would be for sale and 15% for sale and 20% for rent. And then after that April meeting, we came back in November and had a community meeting, reported all of this out in the South District at that beautiful community hall. I can't remember the name of it. It's on the lake.
Terry Trueblood.
Yeah, Terry Trueblood Park. Yeah, beautiful. And so we met with people there, talked to them about this process, showed them what we had prepared at that point and got some feedback from them. And actually, this was their feedback. Open space that's out there needs to be seen as an amenity. It's out there in so many places that have it, turn their back on it, and they put backyards of houses against it, or they don't consider an amenity and it just gets lost. And so they said it really needs to be an amenity, make sure the trails are connected. They also had a lot of concern, as a lot of existing neighborhoods do, about new development butting up to them. And so we heard them, and they gave ideas. Like one idea was keep it all a cornfield. That was one idea. Another idea was put some kind of buffer between our houses and the new houses. And so a lot of things in between too. So we took that feedback and I'll explain how we responded to that a little later. They expected quality housing in neighborhoods. They said whatever comes in here really needs to be high quality. It can't be just somebody offloading bad development in the South District. They're very, very adamant about that. And then they also agreed that affordable housing was needed. Then we came later in that trip and worked with developers and owners and met with them and laid out a couple of different approaches. We said, this is 1,700 acres. You either have to figure it all out or you have to leave it to be figured out, and maybe there's something in between. What do you guys want to do? And so we walked through 3 different options. We walked through low predictability in the process, so you get to figure it out, and you go through a process, and you can propose a brand new project every time. And you'll have to have meetings and the very low requirements in terms of the process, but who knows how long it'll be. And who knows if you'll get through the process. So they said, no, that's sort of what we have now. And then the next step up is, well, we said we could draw a map with a little more of the street network and maybe some preliminary zoning, but not very much, just very minimal areas. And you still have to go through some process, a certain process. And they said, no, that's another version of the one we already have. We don't want that. Well, the next one is number 3. The more predictability version, which basically lays out the whole street network, all the open space network, all the trails, everything, and the zones, and says this is the vision, this is the plan, provided that let's say you have a new idea 3 years from now or even a year from now, and you want to make a street go this way, you want to make a street go this way that was going that way. If you can meet the standards, this code has the flexibility to accommodate those changes. And they said, that's the approach that we want. So what we're going to show you tonight is based on that approach. We call it option one, the most level of detail and the easier processing, because there's less to question and there's more certainty. So, excuse me. Mine get all dried out in this weather, sorry. Okay, so we talked about the input we've received so far, but on what? What is this code about? What is it making? Here are examples of what this code is aiming to make. We are not regulating architectural style, but we're regulating form and relationship of the buildings to the street, the streets, the height of buildings, all that. And one thing, if you take one thing away from tonight, hopefully it's at least this. All of these buildings are house scale buildings. Remember that term, house scale buildings. There's basically two categories of buildings. When you break it all down, there's house scale buildings, which are the size of houses, large and small, right? Those are house scale buildings that might be a single house or a fourplex or a duplex, but they're size of a house scale, right? The other end of the spectrum is what we call block scale buildings, which are buildings that are always bigger than a house. And they might have multiple units in them. They might be commercial, they might be office, they might be a hotel. But as soon as you get bigger than this, it's a block scale building. This entire plan, this entire code is all about house scale buildings. Okay, that's a really important thing to understand and know. So big takeaway on these is that all the streetscapes are pedestrian friendly. And by that, one of the things we mean is that obviously, you know, there are porches and entries facing the street, and the setbacks are not huge. Although we have a utility easement along all the front of lots that makes us have a 10-foot minimum setback no matter what. That's 10 feet and then whatever you add to it. But you see that the garages aren't all over the front? And so some builders still want to build that, and that's great because some buyers still want that. But more and more, people want neighborhoods that aren't dominated by garages on the streetscape. The garages are still there. Look on the picture on the top left. Do you see on that orange building, you see the car just behind that tree? Mm-hmm. There's a two-car garage right there. It's just set back from the facade. So this code has requirements for how far that garage needs to be set back. If it's a one-car, it's set back a certain amount. If it's a two-car, it's set back a little more. If it's a three-car, it's set back a little more. And the lot needs to get wider to accommodate that. And that's a big change. I point that out because there are certain things in this code and this approach that are changes for the development industry in here in Iowa City, and you just need to be aware of that. So there's neighborhoods like this. There are, so you're going to hear the terms T3 and T4, and I'll explain that, but the first one you saw was a T3 type of environment. This is a T4 environment, where the first one is mostly single-family houses with some other things mixed in there like duplexes. This one, the T4, is the opposite. It's duplexes, fourplexes, townhouses, courtyards, and other choices, like a cottage court. Have you heard of that? So cottage court is like a lot, maybe 100 feet wide, with like maybe 6 or 7 individual cottages arranged around a garden, or pocket neighborhood is another thing that people call them. So that's in here. But you can see they're still all house scale. They're not 3-story buildings. They're all 2-story buildings. And then there's a small area that would be zoned at Main Street. So I like to say, I know these pictures aren't of Dubuque, but I always use the example of Dubuque Street here in downtown, that 1 block stretch from the Vetro north, you know, off of that pedestrian mall. That little stretch there, that little 2-story block stretch, that's a small town Main Street feel. That's what we're proposing for a 1 block area, basically at McAllister and Sycamore. And that would be for this whole South District. So it would have its own little Main Street. It just wouldn't compete with downtown, obviously. So And this is not new. There's actually, this is a development in Papio, Nebraska that we're working on. And the developer there, his name is Jerry Reimer. And the project, the name of it is Prairie Queen. And there's 40 acres. I thought it was 60, I said earlier. It's 40 acres, 600 units. And what he did there is he came to us and said, I'm a multifamily apartment developer, and I'm done. I don't want to do it anymore. I'm sick of it. I don't want to do single-family development, but I don't want to do multifamily development as I know it. And I've seen this thing missing middle. What about it? So he signed us up to design this neighborhood. There's not a house in it. It's duplexes, fourplexes, sixplexes, eightplexes, and then townhouses. And then there's a little main street on the top left. And there's neighborhoods around it to the north and west. And so he strategically put that little main street basically in the center of a bigger place. So it's off to the left of his project, but it's actually in the center of a bigger place, when you zoom out. And I show this to you because he's building 600 units here. It's under construction, and it's doing well. People are saying, wow, we really like what you're getting is a smaller unit. People are trading in the single-family house for a different lifestyle. Not everybody, but the market is millennials and empty nesters. And so they're saying, I don't need a 3,000 square foot house anymore. I want to live in a place like this. And an important thing to point out is that the efficiency that single-family house builders count on is similar in these missing middle types. This is a slide to simply show that I think there are 8 building types, different options out there, and we developed 6 unit types and basically arranged them in different configurations to make those different building options. So that way the builder knows, oh, I have a palette of unit types, and I can use A and E to make a duplex, or A, B, and C to make a triplex, and so on. But you don't have to reinvent them. So you've got 6 unit types designed, and he just mixes and matches them to create basically 4plexes, 6plexes, whatever it is, and makes different buildings. But you can see how they're house scale buildings. They have the 2 stories, and the 3rd story is in the attic. The features that this type of approach basically has is these that I'm going to point out here. It's a walkable network of highly interconnected streets, and walkable means that there's somewhere you can walk to within walking distance. And you might say, well, I can walk everywhere, but there might not be something you can walk to, and so that might be a center. It might be like a neighborhood corner with a cafe at it, or the main street, or a little park. There's always something you can walk to, or maybe it's nature here at the edge of the South District. There's a mix of street types. We call them thoroughfare types, but there's a mix of street types. And that's to make, if you look at really interesting places, they're not all the same thing. The public realm is very strong. The public realm meaning the streetscapes outside. When you go outside of a building, you're in the public realm. And so that's always in these kind of projects designed very well, very nicely, and it connects it all. It's like a big fabric or a big network to connect it all. And then stormwater management, it's always integral as a feature instead of being put off to the side and with a fence around it. When you do this, people say, well, we have to collect stormwater and manage it. Why don't we just make it into a system that is right along the streets or into parks, and we can actually see it, and the buildings confront it, and it's a feature. Even when it's filled with water, you can look at something. On-street parking and slower speeds. So the blocks tend to be shorter, and in an attempt to try and slow down traffic, because what we've learned is that when the blocks get longer, people see the longer destination, and they gun it, and they go faster. I'm not saying people won't speed with shorter blocks, but they tend to speed with longer blocks, and that break point's about 600 feet. So anything over 600 feet, 700 feet, people are likely to speed. So in this code, the max length is 600. And then a mix of types that we've talked about, and then the strong connection of the ground floor to the streetscape. So that's where a lot of development could go farther. So you have a really beautiful building, you have a beautiful streetscape, but the ground floor wasn't designed to really match with that streetscape, the way the entries and the way the doors connect to it. That's the missing link in a lot of development. So this code has regulations for that called frontage types, frontage standards. And then lastly, the main street we talked about. And here's an example. I like this example because it's relatively in the region and it's huge. It's called Newtown St. Charles. It's out of St. Louis, Missouri. It's under construction. I think it's been under construction since, I want to say, 03, 04. It's been under construction for 15 years at least. And that's how much of it is built. And it's really, you should drive around on Google Earth, check it out. It's really interesting. And the way that they've used this stormwater management system to create a system of basically ponds to collect the water, and you can walk along them. And also the way that you can see the network is connected. This plan happens to have a lot of alleys. The one that we're proposing, because of developer feedback, does not. They could do alleys if they want to, but this code does not require them. So let's talk about the code. This form-based code, we're writing it for the South District, but we talked to the city about writing it in a way where if you wanted to also someday apply this to other greenfield areas that aren't yet considered, you could use this tool beyond the South District so that you wouldn't just silo it to those 1,700 acres. So they've done that. So when you read this, it doesn't say the South District code, and that's why. So that you could actually take this and through a process map these zones and yet to be determined areas in the future. So you get more bang for the buck. So how many of you have heard of the transect? Okay, a couple of you. So the transect is basically a really simple system that somebody came up with about 20 years ago. And they said, hey, we need a simpler way to talk about development than we currently have. And so this system basically says when you break it all down, when you talk over and over and over and look at everything and boil it all down, there's basically 6 categories or transect. Each is a category. And so the first one is nature. T1 is nature. And you have that here at the edge of the South District. T2 is the country, rural. T3 is basically neighborhoods that are mostly single-family houses, but have something within walking distance to go to. So it's not a lot of suburbia. A lot of suburbia isn't T3. T3 is most like your north side neighborhoods, the single-family portions of it, where you have something to walk to, those older neighborhoods. A lot of that is T3. T4 is the opposite. It's also some of your north side. It's some single-family houses, but mostly fourplexes and duplexes and sixplexes and buildings like that, house scale buildings. We're still all talking house scale, okay? And then T5 is like a majority of your downtown. Big footprint buildings, whether they're a couple stories tall or many stories, usually up to about 5 or 6. And then T6 is like the building across the street with the big hotel or the Hyatt Place or those other big buildings, the big 10, 12-story buildings. So let's apply that to Iowa City. So you see in the left-hand corner, T1, that's nature, right? It doesn't mean the development that left a little park in the middle. It means nature, green areas, wetlands, all that. And in the South District, it's at the edge. You totally have it. And then T2 is farms and country. Not low-density residential, but farms and country. Very different. T3, again, we talked about that, and those are examples here in town. And then you see T4. Now look at T5 and T6. You see how much bigger they are than T4 and T3? You can just visually see that, right? Well, in the South District, we're only talking about these. We're talking about nature, T3 and T4. We are not talking about the others. I think one of the owners / developers asked today essentially about a building that would be in the T5 category. And we said that has never been in the cards as far as we understand the vision for the South District. Now, if that has changed, that's something from a policy level that we need to hear, because this code doesn't accommodate that. This plan does not accommodate that. So yeah, just want to be super clear, that's what we're talking about, these three. So when you break it down in those six, it's really simple to understand, right? Nature, T3, and T4. And we can talk that way. It's a lot simpler than urban medium or residential high. It's like, believe me, we've tried all that, and it's just very hard to communicate with each other about that. Is it RL8, RL12? Which one's more intense? It's way easier with T3 and T4 and T1. So very quickly, those zones with a little more detail. Here's the nature. It's no development. If there's a utility building or some type of safety building that needs to happen out there, obviously, but there's no development per se. It's nature. And we broke T3 down into two flavors. One is the edge, and you see it's 2 stories. And instead of using density and floor area ratio in this code, it uses building types. So it's like saying, here's a duplex, or here's a duplex, and here's a fourplex. Are either of these allowed in the zone? Yes or no? And so that's how this code works. It identifies all the elements, all the types, and it tells you if they're allowed in the zone or not. In this zone, house, duplex, and the cottage court are allowed. In the next flavor of T3, there are a couple more options allowed there at the bottom. You see multiplex small, that's a 6-plex, and the townhouse small. I got to show you this 6-plex to show you something here before I forget. You see the building, middle right, you see the blue and white building? Okay, what do you think that is, anybody? You probably know now what I said. What do you think that building is?
Multiplex small.
What's that?
It's a 6-plex, but
Multiplex small.
It's a multiplex small. It's a 6-plex, exactly.
Yeah.
But the story behind this is that I was talking to the town architect last year, and he said that he loves showing that building because somebody came to him to buy a lot to build a house in Newtown, St. Charles, and they said, "Yeah, take us around and show us what we can buy, what you can design." Because they design every building fresh there. You come, and if it's a single-family lot, they say, here are the rules, but you tell us what colors you want. So they were walking around, and as they walked out of his office and they walked down the street near this, he was showing them other buildings over to the left, and they said, whoa, stop. Design it like that. And he said, that's a 6-plex at 36 units to the acre. And they said, no way. And I said, well, design our house to look like that. So I just wanted to show you that this thing, density and all this other that we've been given as rules across the country, they don't really serve us in communicating with each other. They looked at that and said, wow, design it as a house, and we can't even believe that that's a 6-plex. It feels so good, house scale. So just a little bit of a little story there. So those are the 2 flavors of T3, and then 2 flavors of T4. You'll see that in the T4, there are no houses allowed. This is cottage courts and then multiplex small on courtyard. And then this one only allows 2 types. Remember that of the whole mix, we're looking at probably 60 to 70% of the T3 zones, which is mostly houses, and about 20 to 25% of the T4 zone, which is not houses, okay? There's a mix across the whole place, but generally that's the mix. So when you see the 4-plexes and the 6-plexes and 8-plexes, remember that is about a fourth of the whole mix here. And then the little Main Street area. And then obviously this code has use standards, so people think sometimes the form-based code doesn't regulate land use, but it does. So certain uses are not allowed, or uses are only allowed to be a certain size. And then one of the key factors in this code is that it has standards of how to make the blocks. Now that we're laying it all out, as you'll see, they don't need to go through a process to make the blocks, but they need to go through a process to show what they intend to put on the blocks and how they intend to design each block, which types they're going to put based on the zone that's allowed. And then the street types. So there are 6 street types that make the network, and frontage standards. So this is probably one of the most important aspects of a form-based code. So most of the time, the connection between that private and the public is not really well thought out. And not because people don't care, it just they don't really know how connected those really are and how big of an impact that relationship plays. And people just say, well, it's just a sidewalk and a parkway. How important can it be? Yeah, but how that entry connects to the sidewalk makes it feel pedestrian oriented or not right away, right? Houses are easy, but once you get up in like 2 or 4 plexes or 6 plexes, it makes a bigger difference, whether that building is pedestrian friendly or not. So the code has standards to talk about that and to identify the requirements. Gives you 10 different options depending on where you are in the area. And here they are. You can look at them online, but just to show you that the code has a lot of photographs and diagrams to explain, okay, when we say porch, this is what we mean. It's got to be at least 6 feet deep. It's got to at least be 8 feet tall. Seems like obvious stuff, right? But it's not. Civic spaces. Are you going to build a plaza? Are you going to build a greenway? It tells you the dimensions and where those things are allowed. Okay, what do these 2 buildings have in common? Anybody? Don't think about it too long. Just it really should just pop out to you.
Height.
If you say nothing,
Well,
that's
you said
cool.
height.
I said height.
Height. They have the height. Well, one's 3 stories and one's 2.
Look the same.
They look the same.
Oh, yeah, because of the scale. Yeah. Well, so check it out. The density is almost identical. So the density, you hear people talk about that a lot, right? You hear people say, we don't want the density, don't increase the density. The density is the wrong conversation to be having. It's about building size and what's in each building. Because the building on the left is 175 feet long, 3 stories tall, and has 60 units. The building on the right is 40 by 65 and has only 2 stories with 5 units, and yet numerically, they're almost the same density by 1. I could make this 30-30, but that's not the actual density. Like somebody would look it up and call me and say, it's 29, Tony. So I put 29. But do you see, and I don't know if you have conversations about this, but most cities do, and this is not the argument to be having. Because what happens is you could settle on a number, but if you don't want the building on the left in your neighborhood, you didn't prevent it by the density. It's building footprint, building size. That's what this code, you'll hear people say, wow, we looked through this thing and it really regulates building footprint and size, and we're not used to that. That's why. Because if you don't regulate that by the best of intentions, you could end up with a building on the left. And the building on the left has nice units on it. It's not to say the building on the left is wrong. It's just not for the South District. So, and again, so we provide standards for that. And in this case, there are 11 building types. We've talked about them, from single-family house all the way up to Main Street buildings.
Back to I have one question about the
Yeah.
last.
This one?
One more. So, just for living space, like what would be the square footage for living space, between the 2 buildings?
So the units in the 5 unit building, the one on the right is actually called a mansion apartment. That's the building type it's called. That one has 5 units, and they're pretty big. They're like 1,200, 1,400 square foot units. Yeah, you can see the building go back there. It's not that big of a footprint, so they're big, they're flats. And the building on the left has a variety of them, basically from 800 to, probably 1,800, something like that. Yeah. Yeah, my mom was looking at one in the building on the left. That's how I know that.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, so but look at the building footprints. Just look at the size of the building in the aerial. You can see the whole thing. So unit size is important, but building footprint, like how big it is on the ground, how big would the foundation be? That's what's really important too, because people focus on density and height. Meanwhile, they're missing the bigger question about the footprint. And And I'm not saying we're geniuses. I didn't realize it for a long time either. You know, you just realize these things, you go, whoa. So I'm not saying I knew it the first day I started doing this. I did not. Then there's this other thing about controlling form, that it's an approach that's older than any of us in the room, and it's called main body and wings. It precedes all of us. And if you look at older buildings, you'll see a main body, and then you'll see a smaller portion that comes out of it as a wing. Really well-designed older buildings, they always did this. And so we're showing several options here connected to garage locations, but so there are two things being shown here, but this is simply to show you that this code controls the darker square in the diagrams, that gray, that's the main body. And so the main body can be moved around in the lot as long as you meet the setbacks, and then you can grow that footprint, but with a smaller wing. So right now, if you have a two-story building, you can't just extrude more 2 stories. You have to put a 1-story wing if you want to grow it. So you can have more floor area, but you can't extrude the whole thing over the whole lot. And that's a subtlety that's lost in most zoning codes. Most zoning codes just say lot coverage, building height, and density, or floor area ratio. And this is really helpful because that building that we were just talking about, this guy on the right, what's going to keep it from getting bigger other than a standard saying you can't make it bigger? And if you want to make it bigger, you can add a wing to it. Because if you don't do that, people will make them as big as possible for efficiencies. It's not anything malicious. Yeah, so there was a picture I was just showing you. So again, the main body on that big building to the left is very large, and the main body on the building on the right is house scale. Okay, so the regulating plan, we talked about the 3 options with the developers. We explained the 3 different levels of detail, and they chose option 1, which you can see a preliminary plan we presented last fall, and you can see the drawing here. Those are the 2 other levels. See that? So then, taking the level 1 approach, which they asked for, we went further and developed that into more accurate blocks and streets to show what actually fits on each property. And then depending on where it is, we applied the zones. And this is the first time we're showing this, and we showed it to the owners this morning. So we're looking for feedback on that. Again, the T3 zones are mostly houses with a couple other types in there, and the T4 is opposite, okay? And I just want to say again, for clarity, the T3 is about 60 to 65%, 70%, and the T4 is probably 20 to 25, something like that.
And as far as financial makeup of what it would cost to be in this area, because I think we have the school board here, I think it'd be important for maybe some conversation throughout just to talk about affordability with this type of mix, and the integration of what it could look like with higher and lower economic status individuals living within this community.
Yeah, certainly. So for example, if you look at the T3 zones and you think of that as where the houses are the majority of the mix there, it's up to you and the developer to offer the houses for a certain size and certain affordability. I mean, we can't regulate that, but the affordability is going to come in everything but the houses, for sure. In the houses, you can only do so much, but like duplexes and 4plexes and 6plexes, that's going to provide more affordable units just because of the smaller footprint that you can make them in, and those are mostly in the T4 zones. You know, so I want to be very clear that none of the, we can't regulate affordability, but we're trying to accommodate it by providing the different building types as a way to do that, as opposed to just saying it in words and numbers. So you can look at it and say, you know what, I really hope somebody builds something that's of duplexes and fourplexes as an affordable project. And that's the other thing. If you look at the blocks here, there is no development project. There are boundaries, right? But it all weaves into each other, and you can't. Ultimately, it's like downtown in the north side. You can't tell where one boundary ends and one boundary begins, and so it's really a great. That's the way cities have been made forever, right? So maybe one half of a block. Let's see. Can I blow this up? No, I can't. One half of a block. Like, let's say this is the street, and this half of the block facing the street, and you're the other half of the block facing the street. That could be one project, and it could be an affordable project in the T4 that is either townhouses or fourplexes, or even sixplexes. You could do that kind of thing, or you could say, some communities say, a certain percentage of a project needs to include X percent of affordable units. But yeah, this code doesn't regulate it, it simply just accommodates it. Yeah.
For, what is the,
Go ahead, Bruce.
what is the difference between T5 as far as like building scale and like, we, in T4 is fourplex, sixplex, because I don't see any sixplex or fiveplexes in this area. So what would be the max plex or?
Right. So let's go here. Yeah, so buildings. I don't know if you can see that on your screen, but you see we have two types of houses. I'll just begin here. This is a house, what we call a large house, and this is a small house. This is a duplex side by side. This is a duplex that's stacked. And you probably have seen these types. This is a cottage court. This is really affordable. You put a little garden in the middle. Let's say the garden is a little narrower than this room, and then you put little one-bedroom or two-bedroom, very small two-bedroom units around it, and maybe parking in the back or parking on the side. And I can tell you, in California, in the early 1900s, when the movie studios were getting going, that's exactly what they did. Los Angeles is filled with these because there were people that were coming out from the Midwest and the East, and they couldn't afford a lot, so they needed a small place to live, but they needed to live close to the action, close to their job. So you saw the studios build a lot of these cottage courts all over Los Angeles. LA claims they invented it. I don't know if they did, but that's what they say. So the cottage court is very affordable for what it gets on the lot. And then this is the multiplex small. It goes up to 6 units, so that's a sixplex. Here's a multiplex large. This goes up to 12. These are townhouses. This is a courtyard, which goes up to 16. And then this is a Main Street building that could have maybe, it depends on the size of the building, but it could have units above. Yeah. So the courtyard is up to 16, and the multiplex large is up to 12. Those are the higher ones, and then the sixplex here. And I don't talk much about the 12 and the 16 because they're only allowed in the highest zone, T4 neighborhood medium, and it's a choice. So again, we don't even know if we'll see it, but those are the two higher ones. Yeah. Does that help answer the question?
Yes.
And which one is T5 here then? The last one?
None of those.
None of them,
Remember
right?
that this whole code is written for T3 and T4.
Okay.
So that's a good question. Let me go back to that real fast. If we were writing this code for T5, we would need to write, you see the buildings in the second hand to the right column? We would need to write rules for buildings like that. Look at the bottom row. You see that 5-story building?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, that's T5.
That's a big one.
Yeah. And it's not just the height. It's their footprint, how big they are. So you're a little house, and there's a certain balance. At some point you say, wow, that's too big across the street from me. And the T5 buildings are huge. That's the other thing. Remember the terms house scale and block scale? Block scale buildings can be as big as a block or most of a block. So that's an easy way to just go, that's too big next to houses. Or maybe you don't think that, but at least that's the approach we use. Yeah. Does that answer the question?
Yes.
Okay.
Bruce, if I might comment on your question. I'm not going into this expecting that if you decide to adopt this kind of regulatory development plan, is going to produce very low-income, affordable housing. I'm thoroughly convinced that new construction is not the way to get housing that's affordable to people with under $20,000, $25,000 a year of income. That's not going to work. I think it does produce with much greater certainty, a larger number of homes within a mile to a mile and a half of the front door of an elementary school. And to me, that's a more interesting and more worthwhile outcome than thinking that this is going to produce very low-cost housing.
Yeah,
If you don't agree with that, Mr. Perez.
Yeah, no, that's right on. I mean, the balance with these kinds of projects, it's a double-edged sword. On the one hand, people say, oh, they're too nice because the values go up. And on the other hand, people say, the values went up, so we didn't want the values to go up because my taxes went up. We don't know how to make codes for development that would be mediocre or bad. So these projects, because they tend to offer environments that are in short supply or are more appealing than the environments around them, they tend to go up in value. We are not proposing to regulate this. Even though we have a lot of regulations, we're not regulating architecture like they did in the peninsula. We're not doing that. So that's another, if you got down to that level of specificity, then you are going into another arena, but we're not proposing that here. Yeah. Like Newtown St. Charles, they did that. They said, I think for a majority of that code, they have a town architect that reviews everything down to the eaves, and yeah, we're not proposing that. Yeah, so we just think that if you have the right scale buildings in the right place on the lot, and it sounds obvious, well, where else could it go on the lot? But how does the parking work? Does the parking dominate the streetscape, or do porches and buildings dominate the streetscape? All those little simple things, if you regulate those, it makes a good place, regardless of how good the architecture is. That's been our approach from day one on this. We are not going crazy on architecture. It's not necessary. And the last slide is just next steps. So we are here in early 2020 getting feedback on this draft, and all the feedback that we get and the direction we get, we're going to go back and make the public draft, and we expect that sometime in the spring, late spring, that this might be ready for public consideration, like adoption in the summer. We'll finish the public draft probably April, end of March, something like that. I just want to point something out also about the process that is rare, but really good in this case. Most communities, when they go through a process like this to make any type of code, small or large, they hold back the draft. They work with us for a year, 2 years, 3 years on this before they let the public see it, because they're concerned that once it gets out, people will read it and go, well, you didn't have all this figured out, so we're upset. And so that's the reason. It's not a mean reason. It's just they want to make sure it's all airtight. And what we told the city early on is we said, that's almost impossible, with so much content. Yeah, you don't want to produce a draft that the public reviews that's irresponsible. We wouldn't do that. But you want the public review on this sooner than later. So the city took a really good step and said, yeah, that's a great way to go. We're going to release the administrative draft. So this is the initial administrative draft. We're going to put that out so people can see it. Because if you don't, what happens is people's anxiety raises on a number of different levels. Might be different from you, and so on. And so they've taken that advice, and so that's to let you know, this is out a year sooner than it normally would be, and we're getting a lot of good feedback as a result of it, and collaboration, not people coming to a meeting and saying, I had to wait 2 years for this, and I'm really mad. So that's been really, really effective, and we can open it up, and people have their questions, and hey, that's a great observation, and we've already made some internal changes. Like, hey, that's a better way to say that statement, or that number is better stated this way, stuff like that. So I just want to thank the city for doing that, for taking that step, because that's not normal, and it should be. I'll go sit down if you guys want to talk.
Well, any questions for?
Does this plan include, foresee alleyways?
So alleyways are not required, but they're allowed.
Okay, because alleyways, essentially, at least as far as I understand it here, really increase the cost, both in terms of construction, and then whoever the owner is responsible for the upkeep.
Yeah. A lot of these projects do include alleys because it's more efficient use of the land, the lots on the block. But you can do them without them. So this code is written either way. You can do them, or you can choose not to.
I have a really broad general question just to put you on the spot.
Uh-oh.
Both of the governing bodies up here have prioritized climate action in different ways. And so for us to release this to the public and to talk about what we're trying to do in being proactive in development in this huge greenfield area, I think we need to make sure we're framing that and understanding that. So can you just talk at us a little bit about what elements of a plan like this can help make sure that the development is responsible and sustainable?
Yeah. So first of all, I'm not a climate action or climate expert, but I know that this pattern, the pattern of compact and walkable development is less conducive, or it doesn't prevent car trips, but it's conducive to less car trips. And because of its the interconnectivity, it sounds like a real fancy word. I hate to even say it, but let me say it another way. Because of how many streets connect, rather than how few streets connect, you have more options, and you're more likely in these kinds of projects to see a dispersal of traffic rather than a concentration. One of the reasons you see concentration of traffic in suburbia is because there are few route choices. Everybody's on that same street getting to that same signal, and you're all there. And that intersection has to be widened in a huge way. That produces more car trips, and people are sitting there idling. And these kinds of projects, the idea is that's why we call it walkable. The idea is to have something to walk to. And whether it's nature or something else, ideally, it's these kind of Main Street areas. And we would like to have, let me show you. You see, I don't know if you can see it. You see, do you see me pointing on this? Can you? Yeah. Okay, you see these areas that have this little line going across, these little hatched areas? Okay, they're dispersed across, and here's the Main Street, right? Well, you see these areas? These are intended as the centers or the focal points of each of those neighborhoods. And ideally, they would have a little green, and they would have maybe a small couple stores there, or as much as that area could support, so that you have something to walk to. That's how this is designed to be used. We just are not forcing it through regulation on the developers. We're encouraging it and saying, hey, you can even increase your walkability more. So to answer your question, Laura, the walkability is enhanced by having something to walk to and not having to get in your car to go on every trip. We're not denying people will own cars or will use them. We're simply saying if you had something to walk to 5, 7, 10 minutes away that was worth walking to, that wasn't just more houses, that's where you put these. So those hatched areas actually allow these owners other uses that aren't allowed elsewhere in in that same area. It's called an open subzone. So it means if you have a list of uses, let's say it's 10 uses, and retail and other services are not allowed because it's a neighborhood, in those areas, they are allowed. So the open, it's like a valve. You open it and you say, in these hatched areas, you owner, developer, are allowed these other uses. So please take advantage of that. And let's say that the owner says, well, I sold my property and now I only own up to here, and the developer here didn't want to do this. If it's unused, well, let's just move it up here and put the center up here. So those hatched areas are intended to be those walkable destinations that are not necessarily this main street. And so anyway, the walkability, the high connection of streets and trails produces a dispersal of traffic and produces more route choices. And again, you got to have the destinations to walk to. But if this is built this way, you decrease the number of car trips.
I have a question, two questions about, one about universal design. Is there even a percentage of, what type of consideration have you all done for universal design? And the second one is related to essentially the setbacks for the garages, if it's 1, 2, or 3. Is there any options for entry from the garage into the home?
Yeah, great questions. So on the universal design, all the pictures and the diagrams give the impression that you have to raise your foundation. You can, you're not required to. So we are allowing zero grade entry everywhere. So if you want to raise your foundation, like let's say you do a single family house and you want to have a raised foundation, or you want to raise your pad a little bit and you just build on a slab, you can do that. Universal design, zero entry, it's everywhere. The question about the garages, so this code doesn't require you to detach or attach your garage. It's silent on that, and we realize that that's caused some questions. So today we had a lot of discussion about making that more explicit, that just saying it can be attached or detached. It's up to you as a builder, as an owner, somebody delivering these buildings. And the garage can be, as long as the garage is set back, like we were saying, I don't have the slide here, but basically, if the garage, what we came up with today is a simple rule. Right now we have a parking setback line, but that seems to be a little too much. So what we came up with today, or the last couple of days when we presented to the owners today, is this simple concept. If this is your facade and you want to put a one-car garage here, the depth of the setback is the width of the garage and with a 45-degree angle from the front of your house. So you draw a 45-degree angle and go to the width of one-car garage. That's the setback you need to have. You want to put a two-car, it has to be a 45-degree angle to the two, and so on. And that way, you determine by your choice of how many cars you want to park on a front-facing garage, how big the setback is.
So the only thing that I see with the setback, I hear the concept and I agree with visibility from the street and that type of stuff. It makes it more, you see more house than anything you see.
Yeah.
But I do see the option of the setback given a little more concrete. And also taken away from green space potentially that can be in the backyard on the back of the on the backside. So that's when I hear that, I just see is less usable space for outdoor activity. It would go from it would decrease concrete, which is and provide more green space, which is more climate action friendly. The other thing that I just wanted to make mention is you mentioned as far as like zero grade entry. I think that's great for universal design, but can you talk any other elements to universal design that as far as like the design of the inside of the spaces? Is there any considerations or of like for universal design?
Not at the moment. We're not regulating the inside of the space. The current codes that you already have in place would do that. We're not proposing to, and we haven't been asked to regulate the interiors.
Okay.
I just put these diagrams up, Mayor, about the parking. The one on the left shows a garage off of an alley, which again is allowed, not required. The second one is a garage with a side drive, going down the side. The third one is a garage that's detached in the back. And the fourth one is another version of the second one, showing that it's attached. But we were just discussing these today about ways that you can attach the garage to the building, and how many garages you would choose is up to you, but the lot has to get wide. If you want them all front facing, the lot has to get wider. We had a discussion with a developer owner just before this meeting, and it was almost all about this. And we were looking at the floor plan that he had, and the garage plan, and trying to figure out ways to use that again. Because one of his comments was, well, I have to make new floor plans. And I think that, as we mentioned to him, the approach here is different. Not just to garages, but the whole development. It's different. And that's what we were asked to do. And so if we are off on that, if we are off on the direction that this is supposed to be going in, then we need to know that, because we made a whole code to go. It's not like we're making alien buildings here that nobody would recognize. It's just certain things are changing. Like you can't put a 3-car garage on the front of the lot, and have the house behind it. That's not how this is working. Like we said to him, you can still have a 3-car garage. You just need to make your lot wider, or we gave him ideas to use his existing floor plan and turn it around and remove it from where it was. But to take his existing floor plan as it is and drop it on one of these lots, wouldn't meet the standards. Mm-hmm. But it doesn't mean it can't be molded to fit. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I think it was more of a philosophical divide rather than a technical. Because technical, we could have figured it out. Or we can figure it out, I would say. Yeah.
I just want to ask you, for the step back, like for 3, like space for garage, or for 2, or even for 1, and you said it depends to the, like, if you need 1 car, you step a little bit. If you need 3 cars, you're gonna have more step back. When you say like more step back for 3 car, does that means the house is bigger than the other house that have 2, or it doesn't matter the size of the house? They could have like more space, more garage.
Yeah, it's the, where's that picture I'm going to show you? Yeah, let's see here. It's right here. The top left, you see that garage?
Yes.
Set back? Mm-hmm. It's a 2-car garage, and the car is parked in front of it. And you can see the curb cut is a 1-car curb cut. You see that? And then it flares out. So to answer your question, the house can get as big as the standards allow it to get. Mm-hmm. The garage has to fit within the setbacks too. The difference is that people have been used to putting the garage inside the footprint of the house and putting the house around the back, and so they haven't had to deal with that. But basically, this code is saying you can have all the garage you want. Well, that's not the problem. The problem is not the problem. The shift is we want you to use the house to be the dominant element in the front, not the garage. And that's the shift in philosophy and approach. So again, what we tell cities is, as this developer told us, people still want this. And we told them, yeah, people still want this, but they also want this. So people wanting that big garage approach, 3-car garage approach, or 2, with the dominant garage, maybe they need to just look in another area of Iowa City to buy that house, because this area is, at least the direction we've been given and the approach we're taking, is to not do that. So that choice will still be allowed, and we're not denouncing that choice. We're just simply saying that's not in this palette of options.
With respect to retail, what's in the peninsula has really struggled. And retail, I think, often depends on the size of the community that surrounds it.
Yeah.
Would this area be large enough to support any retail truly so that you can have those walkable destinations?
Yeah, that's a great point. Another reason I think it struggles is it's at the end of a street. It's basically a cul-de-sac neighborhood, right? It's not, there aren't cul-de-sacs in it. I'm saying it's a dead-end neighborhood. There's nothing coming to it from the other way for more traffic or customers, right? You have to go to it and go around it, and you're likely not to do that unless you live there. And there's probably not enough people living there. Bob Gibbs is a retail expert out of Lansing or Dearborn, Michigan. I can't remember right now. Anyway, he says that it takes, and he just put a blog post out this about 2 days ago. He actually said the number. There was a range of households or rooftops, as he put it. And I don't want to misquote him, but he put a number out there. We've got more than that number out here. And plus, this is not a dead end. You've got McAllister connecting all of Iowa City with the South District. So you're going to have people coming to east and west, or down Sycamore to go to McAllister or out of town, right? Or coming back coming north on Gilbert, you might make a right on Sycamore makes a turn, you know what I mean? And then come up. So the South District is not the similar situation to Peninsula. Peninsula is in a corner, and you can't get to it except you go in that corner. As good of a project as it is, the South District is not that. Yeah, but that's a good point. I'm hesitating on giving you the number because I don't want to be quoted wrong, but look it up. Bob Gibbs, rooftops for walkable retail. He just put it out like 2 days ago, and if I find it, I'll give it to Ann, and she can circulate it to you. The number, I will say this. He used to say 16 unit per acre average is what was needed to have enough people in an area to support walkable retail. And that translates to a certain number of population based on your population numbers. But the other day, he put it out more clear than that. So.
With the 1,700 acres of this area, do you have a sort of minimum and maximum based on the forms that are allowed for what the number of units could be?
We haven't done that. You know, if you look at projects like Newtown St. Charles, or even the small one that we're doing, the 40 acres in Nebraska, they tend to range from overall gross. If you just take the whole area and realize what they did, as opposed to using this number I'm going to give you as the beginning. Like when they put it all in, and the gross number that comes out is anywhere between 10 and 15.
Units per acre?
Yeah.
Okay. And
But that's different than a zoning code saying 10 to 15 to the acre.
Right.
It's a whole different calculation. Once you finish one of these, like one area might be 42 to the acre, and one might be 7, and one might 36. Like I was showing you that sixplex is 36 to the acre mathematically. But the whole project of Newtown St. Charles is, it comes in about 10.
so the map that you showed that has like the green spaces and a new roundabout and the different commercial areas.
You mean at the end, the regulating
yeah.
plan? Yeah, okay.
Yeah. So I know you mentioned there'd be some flexibility, but let's say we acknowledge we would need an additional school, right? So where would that go? How would you decide where that goes? Do you make that recommendation for actually mapping out the streets? You can see Alexander right where your cursor is. It's a significant chunk of land that would be designated. How do you plan for that, or do you?
Well, at first, we haven't planned for it because every time we've asked about a school, we've heard nothing. We haven't heard that a new school is being contemplated. So.
No fair, Laura, no fair.
So the first thing to do is know if one's needed, and we've heard to date that one wasn't being contemplated here, that there was one needed, but maybe elsewhere in town. That's what we've heard so far. And then If you knew that one was here, well, what kind of school? Is it high school? Is it elementary school? What is it? Is it, so because they have acreage minimums, I would imagine. And then the other thing is, what is the school looking for? Are they looking to be near few neighbors, or do they care? Or do you want to attach it to the existing school? All kinds of things. I mean, so we need to, in order to answer your question, we have a lot of questions. So,
Got some folks here who could probably start to answer them.
And I'm not sure we can do complete justice to the level of detail that is coming up, but we will be doing another review of enrollment projections based on developments that are in the works, and we go through this process regularly, and I think we've got one coming up, which would contemplate this proposed plan, the number of units, the number of households, the projections for elementary schools children. We haven't discussed where we would have a school in this area in addition to Alexander. I would think it'd be highly unlikely it would be another high school, for example. It's most likely would be an elementary school, depending on what the demographics and the population looks like. But again, we've not had any detailed conversations about this at the school board level. We've got to go through that next projection of enrollment to understand where the growth in the district will be. And this is just one municipality in our 5-municipality district, and so we take all of those accounts into to bear when we look at the need for additional schools.
okay.
It would seem to me like the council could give us a lot of help by either adopting this development plan or saying you're not going to adopt it, so we'll, in deciding about where school children are going to be located over the next 10 years, that'll give us some better things to go on.
Well, I guess, Tony, does the plan allow for that? What is the flexibility that would allow for placement of a school? I mean, if it's 1,700 acres at an average of 10 units an acre, regardless of the demographics, I would think that would be enough households to warrant something somewhere in terms of an additional school.
Yeah, and again, on the 10 per acre, that is a, let us, I just really want to make sure, and whoever's watching this, and that is a general rule of thumb. We have not applied that here. So I don't want people to walk away and go, man, that guy said, 15,000 units or something. There's a lot of things that bear on that. For example, what we've heard to date from the owners and developers is that they prefer, maybe somebody 5 years from now will say different, but these owners and developers prefer a higher mix of houses than the 4-plexes and 6-plexes and 12-plexes. So that number, that 10 per acre, has a lot to do with more of the 12-plexes being involved. So if fewer of those are involved, that number may go down to 4 or 5 per acre across the whole project. I just really want to temper that number that we have not prepared yet. We don't, we can go back and do that, but we just thought it was premature. We needed some feedback. But still, yeah, there's more people that will be living here for sure. In terms of how to accommodate it, again, it's like any of this process. We've worked with the owners and given them our professional recommendation on the design for their land and put down zones, and it's the same with anybody else. If the school district came forward, I mean, the current process doesn't include that. We don't, we don't have anything in our scope that says go work with the school board to put a new site here and figure it out.
And I don't think that's what the process would be. Again,
Yeah.
we collect up what projections for new growth, new development, what the planned number of households are, and we put that into our planning. I mean, for us to build a new school, we'd have to go acquire the property, subsequent or around the development, if it made sense and could sustain a school. So there's a much larger process there. I don't think that's incumbent upon you to think about that.
I just want to say one thing about it is that the way that this plan is constructed with all the blocks and the network like that, it's like cells. So if you look at if you wanted to put something here, you could look at those cells and say, oh, we need 6 cells, 4 cells, instead of carving out some weird shape that then makes the remainder properties pretty unusable and hard to use. Look at them as cells and blocks that you could combine into your site if that's what you're going to do.
And are schools allowed in any transect?
Yeah, it's, again, we have not heard anything about a school, so right now the school isn't even mentioned.
I just don't want to adopt something that would prohibit
Well,
that
yeah,
kind of
I mean, yeah, right now.
public use in that.
Right now, a new school is not contemplated, so the rules don't reflect that. They do reflect, like, small studios and things like that as a school use, but as a school on ground, no. Except for the one that's there. Yeah.
And honestly, Laura, one of the biggest things that would impact us, not only the number of children that are there, but it's the economic status of the children and the makeup, the way that we do it, because there's, if you took, we have the RAM model, which I'm sure you've heard and are pretty familiar with. If this is a RAM 4 or 2 school, Alexander, trying to think of how our numbers go. 2, right? But if it was a 5, then there's like 200 more kids that could go there, and there's space for that there. So I mean, it's just, that's got to have an impact on how we currently operate, boundary-wise. So there's something to think about too.
I also heard you say earlier in your presentation that some of the market demand from this is from millennials and empty nesters. It seems a
Yeah.
category that don't have children.
Right.
Are you able to project with any more detail? Like 35% of the projected lots would be home suitable for families with school-age children.
Yeah, the market study, which is online, talks about, I think it talks about that. I don't know the number. I don't happen to know the number. I know that across the country, the figure that we keep seeing is anywhere between half and 2/3 of buyers are looking for this. Millennials and empty nesters. I'm an example. Our daughter is finishing grad school, so we're essentially empty nesters, and she doesn't want to live in the single-family house that we have, and it's a big single-family house. And my wife and I look at each other and say, "This is too big for us now." Maybe we won't move, but we've actually talked about it. Hey, let's go live in a duplex or a fourplex, and we can own the fourplex and rent the other 3, or we can live in a townhouse near Main Street, that kind of thing. So I have to say, I'm experiencing that. Yeah. So millennials and empty nesters are the 2 big markets for the missing middle. Yeah. And that's the other thing to really keep in mind here. The missing middle is it's like anything. Once something gets popular, it gets abused, right? We see that as Dan originated that term, Dan Prolich originated that term on his observation of what was missing in the palette of choices. People are now using it to get a bad project through because they know that missing middle is popular, and if they say that, the city council and commission will go, "Oh, that's cool, you're doing missing middle," and then we look at it and go, "Whoa, that's not missing middle." And so we have to constantly tell people what it is, because we don't want you to be shocked when you get something that isn't. So again, house scale buildings, that's, yeah, anyway. And I say that because I want to distinguish it from multifamily. Multifamily isn't wrong, it's just another thing. It's another thing.
Any other questions for Tony? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Good to talk with you. Thank you.
Yes. Any other discussion on this topic? If there is none, go right ahead.
Well, it seems to me that we have an opportunity to do some additional thinking and analysis about how this particular zoning approach would affect the school district's need to provide schools for everyone who lives here. And maybe we can continue that discussion in some way, or the superintendent may want to do it, and staff to staff. But to me, we just need to continue that.
And my question was going to be, what can we as a council or as a city do to sort of continue discussion so that there don't end up being any surprises, so things can be well coordinated?
And is there maybe a staff that can talk to just the continuous of the city and the school relationship, just on keeping them abreast?
Good afternoon, Jeff Fruin, City Manager. So Superintendent Murley and I have frequent conversations. We meet on a monthly basis with a group of city managers and other folks in the community. So I feel like we have enough opportunities for communication. I can share with Superintendent Murley the updates, make sure that we're fielding any questions from him and his staff. And of course, if I note any disagreements or concerns, we would bring those to the council, as I'm sure Mr. Murley would bring those to the school board. I think those channels are already open.
Great. Thank you. All right. Well, we really appreciate the opportunity for Opticos to come and give the presentation to both the Iowa City Community School District and again, kind of update the Iowa City Council. And we have two new counselors, so that was their first time, on this side of the table learning about this. And so we really appreciate all the work you're doing. Is there any other items that we want to, any other comments for right now? If there are none, we stand adjourned.
Yes. Pardon?
I feel so important.